All right, can you hear me now? I can't hear you. Hold on one sec.
Can you hear me?
Oh, now I can. Yep, now I can hear you.
Welcome.
Is this background too spicy? I can change it to something plain.
No, spicy is fine. We don't care over here.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Everybody, can you hear her? I think we got everything ironed out. We moved past the days of all the tech difficulties. It's amazing to be in this era of having all the fancy cameras. Look, I can even go over to a camera that shows Rachel's book. Look at that. You can't see it, but I'm showing your book to everyone.
That's amazing. That's
all
super
right.
Cool.
It is. So welcome everybody. Finally, we have Rachel on. I know a lot of people were wondering when was I going to have Rachel on. It was eventually going to happen. It's just the matter of my own snobbiness. I'm just joking. It's not that at all. We're not snobs around here. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're honored to be here. You're welcome. I'm just kidding. That's my favorite thing to say. I'm happy for you that you got to be on here.
I'm very happy for me that I got to be on here. So
now,
thank you.
Let's talk about your book. Is this your first book?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And this is my first book, and I would like to say, when I wrote this, I didn't know if anybody was ever going to read it. It's self-published, and I had like no proofreaders, no editors, nothing like that. So it was a learning curve, and I'm like blown away by how well it's done. So thank you everybody for being so supportive. Oh, I can't hear you.
Before we talk about the contents of the text and before we give everybody their multiple choice quiz that they have to answer at the end, what made you, first of all, write this book? And then I want you to tell us, number one, we got to dispel the number one myth, which is, isn't this about women becoming free and being liberated? Why would you want to smear this idea of people being liberated? Do you want them in chains and bondage, making sandwiches and scrubbing carrots all day long?
Yes, I want them back in the kitchen, chained to the stove, where they are forced to make sandwiches and give birth until they die from childbirth or birth death. No, really, the book came about because I myself decided when I had my kids that I wanted to be home with them. I thought that going to work every day and paying at least half of what I made to someone else to take care of them while I went to a job that I really didn't care about seemed like a really stupid system. And I got used to having to defend my own life choices to everyone around me because this is such a default setting in society now that it was like, when I decided to stay home, we had to make a lot of financial sacrifices, and everyone around us, even friends and family, were like, oh, that's a really bad move and you're going to regret it. And what if you don't have your own money? And just fear mongering all the things that could happen to me from choosing this, right? So I got into this habit of having to make an argument to almost everyone I knew. And I kind of got good at defending it. And then I would get curious about, like, well, how did we get here, and who came up with this stupid system, and why am I expected to work when I've got 5 kids at home? Like, this seems silly, right? So I just started researching kind of the history of the women's movement, thinking that it was going to be more about who financed it and things like that, which it is. The book does cover that for sure. But I kept coming across this theme over and over when I would kind of do like a little bio on each, women's lib person or suffragette, where, oh my gosh, they're into the occult. This is weird, and it just became this recurring theme. And it was like almost all of them. So I realized, partway through the research, the book has got to be about this, because this is where this idea is coming from, So that's how it started.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, I remember reading a long time ago the associations between the women's liberation movement and the older ideas of goddess worship, the older ideas of what would eventually become witchcraft, modern witchcraft. And a lot of people they're surprised when they find out that modern witchcraft, I know you know this, but modern witchcraft, it's got this pedigree, or this idea behind it, that it is old and that we're going back to some ancient religion. But the irony is that the modern proponents of Wicca are actually people who made up the religion wholesale from a conglomeration of other religions, and they were all dudes who wanted to smack the butts of naked women in the forest, and has nothing to do with women's empowerment, has nothing to do, has to do with dirty old men, basically. So that was something that I noticed that surprised me. And so I'm happy to see that you did a whole book, and I've not read the entire book yet, but I have read some sections that I thought were really cool. What one thing that I didn't know about that you really honed in on in this book was, I knew about Mary Wollstonecraft and all these people, but suffragettes, you're saying that suffragettes were tied into this stuff. Can you go into that?
Yeah. So everybody in school gets like a little tidbit of, Susan B. Anthony, maybe Elizabeth Cady Stanton, even President Trump post-mortem gave Susan B. Anthony like a pardon because she had been arrested and gone to prison for the suffrage movement. And so everybody is told this fairy tale that one day in the late 1800s, women looked around and they went, gee, golly gosh, I'm oppressed. I don't have any freedoms, and I'm forced to stay home, and I want to have a career, and why can't I do the things men do? This isn't fair. And they all gathered together, and they got their signs, and they started marching, and they demanded that they could vote, and they liberated everyone. And we're all supposed to be grateful and thankful to them for their hard work of liberating women, when really that's not what happened at all. So the suffragettes, in large part, many of them, most of them, there's actually an old saying that there's pretty much no suffragette who hasn't sat at the seance table. And this is because the suffrage movement came about at a time when spiritualism was huge. It was like right after the first and second Great Awakenings in America, when we got some really kooky, crazy ideas about what Christianity was. It started to be mixed in with transcendentalism and Unitarians and Universalists and all these crazy heresies. Some of the most radical Protestant liberation theology people really got into feminism and women's lib because it kind of went along with like, emancipation from slavery and other social movements that were happening. So many of them made a living on the side as tarot card readers, fortune tellers, spirit mediums, and things of that nature. One of the most popular ones being Victoria Woodhull. If you guys have never heard of Victoria Woodhull, she's pretty interesting. She was actually the first woman who ran for president with Frederick Douglass. And she ran as, I think, the Equality Party. So this is not, if you guys think this stuff is brand new, it's not. We're talking about, the 1880s, 1890s here that she is doing this. And it's very interesting, her story, because if you guys are familiar with Jay's work, she was bankrolled and financed by Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was like the big patriarch of the Vanderbilt family. She and her sister were literal snake oil salesmen. who were on the run from the law because they were selling fake cancer treatments. They were doing, spells and witchy things to try to heal people from diseases. And they would continually get caught, in one state and have to flee to another state to avoid prosecution. And at some point they got hooked up with Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he would say that they were his spirit mediums. Now, he made a huge amount of money in one of the first Black Friday market crashes, and the New York Times interviewed him and asked him, how did you make this money? How did you know this was going to happen? He made like 26 million in today's money. I think it was 1.3 million at the time. And he said, do as I do and consult the spirits. So he said that these women had done seances and given him this spiritual insight. But what really happened was they were both free love advocates. They were kind of pimps. They had a prostitute network that would spy on rich men and bankers. And they would get intel from different people in the market and then give it to Cornelius Vanderbilt. So were they doing witchcrafty stuff? Probably. Were they also total frauds and con artists? Absolutely. Either way, the gender studies professors don't want to tell you that part. They literally gush over this woman like she's some amazing hero who liberated women when she was a snake oil salesman and a con artist. So that's how she got bankrolled and became one of the first female trading companies on the New York Stock Exchange, was from that money they made for Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Vanderbilts because I remember one of the first places I encountered this idea, which when I noticed this, I was like, hey, wait a minute. Nobody ever asks the question of who puts the money behind these movements. It's like, do people really think that they just spring out of nowhere because some woman somewhere has a really good idea and it just spreads like wildfire? And they don't realize that, no, schools, universities, foundations, they're putting money into this to get these things going, to indoctrinate people. So when I was reading the Rockefellers biography by Collier and Horowitz, when I first encountered this, and by the way, it ties into the occult too, because one of the Rockefeller daughters went to Carl Jung and they did this hypno-regressive thing where he went back to her past lives. And Carl Jung told her that she was the reincarnation of Aten something, the child brought, the daughter of Pharaoh. So within the Rockefeller family of the women, especially, you have this tendency towards the occult. She seemed to actually believe that, even though, like you said, the other members of the family were famous mountebanks. The granddad was a snake oil salesman. Anyway, long story short, you go up to the fast forward to the middle chapter in the book where it talks about Abby's funding of feminism to the tune of millions and millions of dollars back in the 60s and 70s. Yes. So 60s and 70s money, millions of dollars, that was a lot. That was what kicked off third wave feminism. And I'm just making the point to back up what you're saying, that, this stuff it's not organic. It comes from big money, big families, big foundations to change society.
Yes. One of the primary funders of the suffrage movement was Alva Vanderbilt Belmont. If you guys watched the Richard Grove episode that Jay did with him recently, where he mentioned August Belmont, Alva Vanderbilt Belmont, first she married Cornelius Vanderbilt's grandson, divorced him, got one of the largest settlements in history from her divorce, because that was pretty rare at the time. And then after divorcing him, she married his good friend, Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont, who was August Belmont's son. And they were Rothschild bankers, investment bankers. And also, he was also into some really crazy stuff and some occult kind of things. And then he died. So she got all his money too. So this woman had like a double windfall and became one of the most wealthy women of the Gilded Age, and gave almost all of her fortune to the suffrage movement. And there's a whole chapter about that and how much money went into it and where that came from. So you've got Vanderbilts, Belmonts, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, all involved in the early funding of the suffrage movement. And one of the things I want to impress upon people is you'll often hear people say, well, third wave or fourth wave is really crazy, but first wave feminism was probably good. And it's like, no, they were some of the craziest of all of them. The first wave feminists were no better. You could argue that they were even worse than some of the later ones. The later ones were just following suit.
Yeah, this makes me think of something, and I'm not positive if this is correct. I'm just going from memory, but I'm pretty sure the Peabody family, which is really important in Memphis, they have the giant Peabody Hotel, is connected to the Elizabeth Peabody. And I wanted to ask if you knew about her, because she's one of the co-founders with Horace Mann and John Dewey of the American public education system. And I remember her having this crazy quote that she said that she created kindergarten, right? So kindergarten, she said, would bring the kingdom of God and the millennium that we had all hoped for through socialism. So she was probably into the theosophy circles because they were all socialists. So I'm curious, was she involved in women's stuff? I don't even know. Maybe you know.
She was involved in the Transcendental Club. I've read a lot on her, and I did a couple pieces for my old Patreon about Elizabeth Peabody, because I talk a lot about homeschooling.
Oh, cool.
And
Wow.
she is, like you said, one of the founders of the public education system. And the Transcendental Club was like this early version of New Age, almost transhumanist stuff. They had Margaret Fuller is in my book, and I talk about her in the Transcendental Club, and how they were like early prototypical like gender abolitionists who wanted Skittle stuff and things like that going on. And Elizabeth Peabody was in that circle, and they did start public education because they thought the only way we can't all transcend into the one. We can't be monists and return to the one source of the oversoul, right? Unless we have gender equality and total human equality. And the way to do that, so this is very important. Public school was never about teaching kids anything. It was never about learning. It was always about indoctrinating everybody with the same ideas, the same beliefs, the same worldview, so that they thought this would bring world peace. They thought this would bring unity, world peace, and that we would all transcend as human beings into the new age. So this is new age stuff that was going on from about the 1840s onward. And just in the 1840s alone, I think there were 80 some radical communist socialist cults in the United States alone, which you never hear in school.
Right. Yeah, I remember the book to read on this, by the way, if you've not read it, for guys in the audience, obviously get Rachel's book. I have the book linked here in the show description. You can also get it in the chat. It's the top link there. I assume that it's Amazon is where we would get it, or okay. Because I don't really like, selling my books on Amazon. So it just depends on, the audience.
If you guys don't like Amazon, if you can find me on Twitter, shoot me a DM and you can buy one from me directly if you'd rather.
So Rushdoony, who I'm not advocating all of his theology, but Rushdoony has a great book on the history of American education, and a large portion of it was several chapters dedicated to these people who were, like you said, not just theosophists and socialists and Unitarian Universalists. That was actually a cover for some of what at that time was, occult groups, New Age stuff, witchcraft. They were hiding and doing stuff under the banner of the Unitarian Universalist Church. And so that was one of the hotbeds of these revolutionary ideas at that time. But they specifically said that they wanted to create public education as a means to bring, quote, the new age and the socialist utopia. They really thought that they could do that through this brainwashing mechanism, which had nothing to do with teaching people how to think, but rather teaching people how to be socialized, as they said. So what's fascinating, that as Rachel's bringing to the table here, is that they weren't just involved in education and changing society. They were involved directly, all of these same people and these same families, in feminism. And so it's not a women's liberation tool. Then is it a tool of, is it actually the tool of oppression?
Yeah, I would say that it is. Like, if you go to where you can find my book and you read the little description, I actually make that argument, and I say what feminism promised us was, it's going to protect you from, abusive husbands and boyfriends. It's going to liberate you and give you financial freedom. And then you can love someone just because you love them and not because like you need them to survive. Like all these promises of what feminism was supposed to do for women. It didn't do any of that. In the last chapter, I go over a ton of data and statistics that prove that. What it did was take women away from the people who actually have a vested interest in their well-being, their fathers, their husbands, the men around them who love and care about them. And part of feminism is you kind of have to buy into this idea that all throughout history, men didn't give a crap about their wives, their daughters, their sisters, their mothers, that they just brutally oppressed them, or acted like cavemen and abused them and beat them. These are all really big myths and just things that have been perpetuated, and I still hear it all the time. I debate this subject all the time with other women who are feminists, and they will repeat these same tropes to me over and over. And so the second chapter of the book, I think I take some time to go over all of those myths and kind of debunk them. Like, yes, women could own property. Yes, women could own businesses. Yes, they could do a lot of things throughout history. And what feminism did was it just like dismantled the family. That's all it did. It didn't liberate women, because now women, if you look at the jobs we worked 100 years ago in 1920 and you compare them to the top jobs we work now, they're almost exactly the same. We basically swapped out farm labor for HR work, and everything else is still the same. Secretary, nurse, kindergarten teacher, daycare worker, retail people, cashier, cook, things of that nature is still what women do. So now, instead of working for your family, for your husband, for your children, you work for international corporations. So what did this do? It doubled the tax base, number one. Number two, it brought down the price of labor because it flooded the labor market in less than 20 years, and drove down wages and made it almost impossible for people to survive on a single family income. And what did that do? It means, well, mom has to work now, so the kids have to go to daycare. They have to go to a before school program, and then they're in public school for 7 hours, and then they go to an after school program. And they have programs like Head Start, where they want you to get kids into these programs at 2 years old, 6 months old, things like that. And they're in it all the way through until college. And then they go to college and get indoctrinated further. And women now hold 65% of all college debt in this country. So the average woman starts out in life with $30,000 in debt, a job that makes an average of $40,000 a year. And if she does want to have kids, she's got to pay childcare. She's got to pay the student loan. How is this freedom exactly? These are the things I went through as a young woman, where I was like, who came up with this? This is a terrible system, and it makes no sense. Yeah.
So going back to some of that history that I didn't know about that I find fascinating, I'm curious, what about, so you mentioned Mary Wollstonecraft. I remember when we were doing my French Revolution classes, we went really deep into that in undergrad and grad school. And I'm trying to remember, I mean, it almost seems like revolutionary socialism almost always has this attached to it. I mean, you don't ever hear about revolutionaries who don't believe in equalitarianism, gender equalitarian, because it all seems to go together with the socialist ethos. Were all of these early feminists just ideologues, or did you ever come across anything that mentioned like the 1700s era feminists? Who was behind that? I mean, was there? Do you know? I've always wondered. I just don't know.
Yeah, so Wollstonecraft was from the French Revolutionary period, and she's actually an example I give of how women couldn't have been that oppressed, because she was hanging out with all the male intellectuals of her time, like Thomas Paine, William Godwin, other French revolutionaries. She even traveled from England, where she was from, to France to witness the revolution, to hang out with other revolutionaries. She was paid to write. She was paid to make pamphlets on feminism and things like that by the same type of people who funded the French Revolution and all of those revolutions of that period. So they did kind of choose her and prop her up. And the way she got into those circles was because she was having affairs with several of the men in the circle.
That makes sense. Okay, that's what I didn't know.
So
okay.
She kind of got in that way, and then they kind of propped her up, funded her. She traveled all throughout Europe. She traveled to America. She had multiple affairs. She had a child out of wedlock, and nobody threw her in jail. Nobody beat her. Nothing happened to her. She was allowed to do this. And it didn't seem like it was a big problem for her. She made a living off of it and traveled the world doing it. So it's hard to imagine that these tales of like beatings and oppression were real, unless the patriarchy was just really slacking off and didn't mind because she was a loose lady or something like that. But yeah, that's basically what happened at the time. Was the free love women who were sleeping around those circles got promoted, got funded, and by the usual suspects, Rothschild banks.
And by the time we come up to the Fabian Society and the Milnerites, they were also proponents of this radical equalitarianism and free love. Yeah. So the Beatrice and Sidney Webb and all those Fabian circles, they were also pushing this free love stuff too, way before the 1960s revolution. But could you walk us through, because I don't actually know a whole lot about the history of feminism, what is first wave, what is second wave, and what is third wave, and does that really matter? I know that they're all bad, but we always hear the intellectuals talking about this like it's really important to know those. So why are there three waves of it?
So first wave would be like suffrage, right? First wave would be like 1700s to about 1920, and that was just suffragettes and the revolutionaries we were just talking about. Second wave would be from about 1920 to the late 60s, and that would be like your Betty Friedan, your Simone de Beauvoir, your 60s radicals. Gloria Steinem would be second wave. Third wave was like the 70s through the 90s, which you would probably at that point start to include people like pop stars, movie stars. Oprah was huge in third wave.
Well, then hold on. Then I've got it wrong. So Abby Rockefeller, then she would have been funding second wave feminism.
She kind of crossed both. Okay. So she started in the 60s with the crazy six. She was like Abby Rockefeller. The second one, there's two of them. The first one was the one who talked to Carl Jung and thought that she was the reincarnation of an Egyptian god. And then there was a second Abby Rockefeller who was David Rockefeller's daughter. And she was a radical separatist, like lesbian separatist, thought men were evil.
Yeah, she hated her body. She wanted to be a man.
Yeah, she wanted nothing to do with women, thought men and women should live separately, just super radical. She was the leader of a weird radical, like almost a feminist terrorist group called Cell 69, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And she was like 60s into the 70s. And one other thing you see wrapped up in this the whole way through, from first wave all the way till now, is veganism, vegetarianism. So in the first wave, it was all of the people who were against animal testing, and they didn't use the word vegan at the time, but they were vivisectionists. So they didn't want animal testing. They didn't think animals should be eaten. So you'll see socialism, communism, vegetarian veganism, and then the new age occult stuff always kind of packaged together with the social revolution.
They always go together.
The whole way through. Yeah.
They still go together nowadays. I mean, like you see an Instagram yoga chick, like she's going to be into like meditation, plant-based, right? Like, exactly.
Yeah. Yep. So that's something that's continuous all the way through all the different waves. And now people don't even know what wave we're in. Some say fourth, some say fifth or sixth. Now it's about this intersectional feminism, right? Where we play oppression Olympics, and it's like, well, I'm a woman, but I'm white and straight, so I'm not as oppressed as this woman over here who's, brown and Skittles, or this woman over here who's also an immigrant, or this woman over here who's also disabled. And so they smush it all together, right? And they try to, like I was saying, they think that this is a way to create human equality so that we can transcend. And even in the 1800s, you see this wrapped up with transhumanism stuff a lot. And that's why I'm working on a second book that will be out later this year about what happened in Russia and in the East in the like Bolshevik era, because they had their own crazy radical feminist ideology that was packaged differently so that it'd be more palatable to the East. They used the Western liberal democratic order here in the West, and then they used like radical communism in the East, and both ended up in destroying the family. Like the ultimate conclusion was, you got to get rid of marriage, you got to get rid of the family, you can't be having all these babies, right? So we get abortion rights and we get all these other things wrapped in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that people don't realize that when you actually read the big money, the foundations, the documents. I was just going through the day tapes. The day tapes talk about this, that they talk about feminism being promoted in that 1969 famous series of lectures where all the doctors got together under Planned Parenthood at the Rockefeller Foundation conference. And Dr. Day, who's leading it, says basically that anything that promotes not pair bonding, not having families, not having relationships, all of those things should be pushed to the max, including radical feminist ideologies, because that helps to break down society. So you understand, from the people putting the money and the funding and the energy into this, they're saying in these books, in these lectures, in these presentations in the 60s, that it's done to actually degrade and break down the society, the civilization, so that we just don't have more people. That's the ultimate main goal. And as you said, there's ancillary, positives to it for the elite to have more people in the workforce, more energy being taxed. So that all of these things factor into it. But I'm just trying to stress that if you go look up the Berelson memo, the Jaffe Berelson memo, and it says, I can't remember if it says feminism specifically, but obviously feminism fits in with all of the things that the Jaffe memo says to promote. That's an actual simple one-page thing. It's a memo telling all the things to be promoted to reduce the population in society, and feminism and alternative lifestyles are all part of that. And anyway, I'm rambling now, but so back to the occult stuff. One thing I noticed that really tipped me off to this maybe 5 or 6 years ago was when a group of witches, I'm not joking, put out a book talking about how the goddess is the overthrowing of God the Father. And so feminism is goddess worship. And that is, they were arguing in this book that it was like an academic book that came out. They were arguing that no, to be truly feminist is to be a goddess worshiper, because true feminism is not equal rights, blah, blah, blah. It is, they said, the overthrow of God the Father.
Yes. Yeah. So throughout my book, I make this case a lot, and I provide examples of this throughout pretty much all of history. Again, this isn't like a later thing. This started with First Wave. So one of the people I reference in the book is actually a religious scholar who is a professor in Sweden right now. He wrote his PhD thesis on how Lucifer was the symbol for the women's liberation movement in the mid-1900s.
Yes.
And they were not shy about this. You can go to Amazon right now and order a book called The Woman's Bible by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and 24 other feminists. Now, this was written in the 1880s, came out in the 1890s. They've had multiple press runs of it even back then because it did so well. And in the preface, she tells you exactly what she's doing. They were not really trying to hide it. She said the only thing standing in the way of women's liberation is traditional Christianity, because it's patriarchal. And because it's so influential, because the Bible is such a popular book, we cannot just get rid of it. So what we have to do is turn it into something unrecognizable. We have to change it into a liberation theology. We have to turn it into a feminist liberation book instead of a Bible. So that's exactly what they did. They rewrote the first 5 books of the Bible, of the Old Testament, and took out anything patriarchal and changed things they didn't like and made it into something it wasn't. Now, if you look at the group that she wrote that with, out of the 24 women, there were like 8 occultists, 4 New Agers, several Unitarians, a dozen atheists. So it's like a bunch of occultists, New Agers, and atheists rewriting the Bible and then selling it as a woman's Bible. And so at this time period, people didn't know that. They just bought this, and it was a very successful piece of propaganda. So it was always the idea that Christianity is the thing standing in the way. And that's why they embraced it. If you believe in this ideology, you're going to love things like witchcraft or the New Age or theosophy, because they all have an element recurring throughout of goddesses who are vengeful and punish men.
Yes.
Kali, Lilith,
the dark goddess, which is actually something that is popping up. I noticed a lot in pop culture of late. So you're seeing this character archetype popping up in the last, I'd say, 5 years, just everywhere. And this is on the heels of the idea that all of the heroes in all the movies now, especially the action movies, have to be women.
Yep.
Right. And now it's like 13-year-old girls who can, beat up 23 Black Ops guys at one time.
Yes.
Right. It's like,
yes, exactly.
right. I mean,
chicks.
exactly. Right. It's just getting nuts. And that's all intentional. I think people don't realize that the study of archetypes, I'm not a big proponent of Carl Jung, but there is something to archetypes, because if you're just looking at it from the perspective of semiotics and symbolism for a culture, if I was going to do, let's say, psychological warfare against a culture that had a strong male archetype of whatever that might be, a culture that has the notion of God the Father or something like that, what I would want to do is inculcate that culture with revolutionary ideas, especially geared towards the youth, that corrupt that archetype. So there's many ways to do that. And I might do that through having the character of the father always be adult, always be this Homer Simpson kind of goober, always be this coward, always be a soy man, whatever it is. And then I have, the only powerful, strong figure that you look to is a 13-year-old girl who, like slices everybody up with ninja blades. Right. I mean,
or the single mom,
single mom. I was going to say the single.
She's a nuclear scientist single mom who's going to save us all from the asteroid or the latest outbreak, right?
Do you remember the this reminds me of the character of exactly. Christmas Jones, and it's the Bond movie with Pierce Brosnan, and it's Denise Richards is playing the nuclear scientist who ends up helping James Bond, but she is a Skittles person. So she's she's the Skittles nuclear science woman who saves the world. Really, it's not James Bond. It's really her saving the world from nuclear destruction, right? So it's just absurd, right? But I mean, that's what, and they're rewriting all of history now where it's like, oh, actually all of science and civilization was actually, maybe some even better, it's some indigenous women's, right?
Right.
All of history was.
I don't know if you know this, but they made a movie all about how women of color did all the math that got us to the
everything
moon by hand, right?
To the moon.
To the but
we was rolling up there in a Lincoln to the moon. We were flying up to the moon in a Lincoln with Matthew McConaughey right here.
Yep, a bunch of ladies of color math geniuses did it all by hand, got it right on the first try. It was amazing, right? So we had to make a movie about it.
They was using a Barabacus.
If you
move them little things on a Barabacus, you could build a machine to go to the moon, girl.
I'm joking. If you look back at the first cover of the first issue of Ms. Magazine from 1972, it has a picture of the goddess Kali on it. And I thought to myself, well, that's really weird. If I was trying to sell a magazine to women in suburbia in 1972, why would I put a Hindu goddess with blue skin and multiple arms and everything on there? Well, it's because she is a vengeful, wrathful goddess who wants male sacrifice. She's like a killer of men. She wears severed men's heads and severed men's arms on her as her outfit. Her earrings are aboboed babies. And the reason they picked her is because she is like the destroyer of men. And if you look in the Guinness Book of World Records, it says that the most murderous cult of all of human history was the Thuggies. That's where we get this English word thug from.
Shit, we've all seen Temple of Doom, man. Yeah, we've all seen Temple of Doom. Kalima Shakti Day.
Yeah, yes. Exactly. So they really, this was a cult in India that followed Kali and sacrificed, they think, over 2 million men to her.
That many?
Wow. They think it's over 2 million. And it was maybe one of the only good things the British Empire did was get rid of those guys, because they got tired of all of their scouts that they would send out getting murdered all the time in ritual sacrifices to some weird Hindu goddess. But that's who Gloria Steinem and her CIA funder.
I was about to say CIA money going to Gloria Steinem, CIA money going to Miss Magazine, CIA money going to Playboy.
Yes, they funded all that stuff. They recruited Gloria right out of college, sent her to India for a while. She was part of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Exactly. And then they started Ms. Magazine, and they put the goddess Kali on the very first issue. It's like, I really think they get a kick out of doing that kind of stuff. They think it's really cute and funny. and most people don't pick up on it, but now you guys know. So if you ever do see that issue and wonder why the hell there's some, Hindu goddess on a women's magazine from the 70s, that's why. I mean, they weren't being shy about it. They just put it right out there.
You drink the black juice of Kali, wake up. Feminism is the black juice of Kali, right? Is Kali a man or woman? I can't remember. So the thuggies were.
She's a woman.
She's
a woman. Yeah. Shiva is her consort.
That's right.
And like one of the legends has that he had to like restrain her to keep her from destroying the whole world, which is another like recurring theme in the goddess stuff, is that a female goddess who is the symbol of birth and fertility is also the one who's going to destroy all of humanity at some point.
We also have
from her rage at men.
Right. Oddly enough, and you wouldn't expect this, but Jamie and I, not so long ago, we watched Pirates of the Caribbean, and I'd forgotten that the voodoo woman who is Calypso, she's actually the dark goddess who has to be restrained by Johnny Depp, Captain Jack Sparrow, and other characters, because when she gets mad, she gets loose and she starts to destroy she could potentially destroy the whole world. Just another dark goddess imagery that we'd noticed in fiction recently. But I'd forgotten about this notion of male sacrifice in these kinds of cults too, because even in the pagan tradition beyond that, when they did do human sacrifice, they tended to think that a young male, I mean, they would sacrifice young virgin women too, but also young men. I think Crowley has that weird statement, doesn't he, that a young boy is like the best sacrifice. So there's some sickness, something very inherently, I think, obviously demonic about this that a lot of people overlook. They wouldn't think about feminism as something overtly demonic because they think it's about freedom and liberation. But no, it's actually about inversion, because the real roots of this are destroying the thing that produces other humans, the symbol of fertility. And that's why when you go back to the occult stuff, it's the witch is always the one that's in the mythology that eats the children. It's like that Kabbalistic story of Sefer Yetzirah, or one of those Kabbalistic stories that there's this that Lilith is loose and she requires the death of infants, right?
Yep.
And so the witch, the Lilith figure, the infant sacrifice is the same demonic force, I'm saying, behind all of this.
Yeah, 100%. It definitely is. And like, even if we go to Margaret Sanger, like the chapter I wrote on her was the one that was like emotionally hardest on me, because I put in the book that I think I make a compelling case that she built her whole thing on fraud. Her whole, Planned Parenthood, the books she wrote. She claimed to have gotten thousands of letters from women all over the country who claimed to not know why they kept getting pregnant and how to avoid it. And I asked my grandmother, who is 96 years old, I asked her, Grandma, did your mom know like what was getting her pregnant? And she said, oh, of course she did. In fact, she had trouble with, my brother, who was the fourth child in the family. And the doctor said, no more of that because it's too dangerous for her. And so my parents, worked around it. So even my 96-year-old grandma's like, yeah, of course they knew that. Well, she claimed to have had thousands of letters from women all around the country who were just, oh, I'm on my 16th child and I'm only 21 years old and I don't know what to do, kind of absurd. Like, the propaganda was so over the top that it was pretty absurd and unbelievable to begin with. But then I went and checked, because there's something called the Margaret Sanger Papers Project, which is this giant archive of everything she ever did in her life. Like, if that woman wiped her mouth on a napkin, they have it in the Sanger Papers Project. But crazy, they don't have any of these letters. They said that they probably got lost to time or destroyed, or, we don't really know. We have like 20 of them out of thousands, right? So I'm like, okay. So it was all baloney. And then doctors who worked for Planned Parenthood in the early days have come out and said that a lot of the statistics they used to cite were bogus, and that they knew they were bogus, but it was good talking points. So that whole movement, and still to this day, that whole movement is built on lots of lies, lots of propaganda, inflating and just making up false data, things like that. And it made me so mad that it was kind of hard to even write it. And then her personal life was even worse. One of her boyfriends is one of your favorite people, H.G. Wells, who called her.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah. H.G. Wells talked about total equality amongst the sexes too in his
yeah
in his writings.
They had an affair that lasted until his death, which was about 26 years from when they met to his death. On and off, had an affair, and he called her the most brilliant woman in the world, and he said her legacy will have more impact on the future of humanity than anything else in the next 100 years. That was, and if you guys watch Jay's channel, you probably know a bit about H.G. Wells and all the stuff he was about and the things that he was into. And he just adored her and thought she was amazing. She was off running from the law and traveling Europe, and she was a big swinger. She was another free love swinging advocate who, you know, most of her partners were married. She was married. Everybody was Skittles and went both ways type of stuff. And it was just this intellectual degen circle of depopulationist people who ran this whole thing.
You said she's a big swinger. She looks like she's got a big swing in something. She doesn't look like she looks like a man with a big swinging thing. So
she does.
She was
but if you look at the people she was with, they weren't any better.
They weren't hotties
too.
They weren't hotties either. You don't think you're saying Bertrand Russell's not a hottie?
Yeah, him and H.G. Wells. I
mean, he looks like a turtle.
Top 10 list.
Yeah, he looks like a turtle head crossed with a penis.
Yeah, she was so busy running around doing all this awful stuff. And one of her children, she had 3 children. One of them grew up and wrote a memoir where he said she would just leave them with whoever. She didn't care. They wouldn't even know who the person was. And one of her children actually died of pneumonia in a boarding school waiting for her to come get her. Her daughter died waiting for mom to come get her, and mom never came to get her, and she died there. And after that happened, she was having another one of the people she was having an affair with was a guy named Havelock Ellis, who was another influential writer and swinger and all that sort of stuff. And he got her into some Rosicrucian rituals that were meant to try to contact her deceased child. So even though she had an atheist bent, she would dabble in the occult stuff with these guys too. So it was just like, I'm writing the book and I'm like, every time, man, like every time with these crazy women, and they have this same pattern of like, they get married, they have kids, they don't want to be responsible and take care of the kids, so they run off, they leave the kids, they have affairs, they dabble in the occult, and then more often than not died a terrible death on top of it. So I don't think it's a good life trajectory to be a feminist activist. Wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, this sounds like I mean, and we find the same thing with a lot of the occultists too. Like they have these early and ignominious demise that, you know, puts the period at the end of their life. Especially like with Crowley, he dies like a, you know, broke heroin addict. So how was all the magic not working? I mean, did it not do any, like your life was wasted? And I mean, I think this is a great point that you bring up a lot of times, which is that you know, we can be talking about this academic stuff and all this history, which is great, but you always make a great point to say that, look, the rubber meets the road for actual young women who are going to be young, no longer young at a certain point. And if you bought into this, like, who do you think is going to be helping you out and taking care of you when you're 50, 60? The state? The state's going to cook you and make you into compost, dude. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Who's going to be taking care of you if you don't pair bond?
Right. And if you live to be 82 like the average woman does now, and this is what women don't understand, when you're 20, you're fertile. You don't even have to be like overly attractive. You just have to be fertile and willing and decent, right? And you get male attention, you get a lot of help. The world kind of caters to you, and then you hit the proverbial wall at some point between 35 and 40, where even if you look great, even if you've had work done or you've taken care of yourself and you look really good, you're not 20. So like, I'm 42. You put me next to a 22-year-old, there's no competition. It doesn't matter what I look like. You know what I mean? And women who are young don't understand that. They can't conceptualize that there will come a time when the power they get from their fertility is not going to be there anymore. And another 40 years is a long time to live if you built your whole life around your fertility or your sexual attractiveness. And feminism promotes sexual power, that women should use their sexuality for control and for power. It's in every pop song, every hip hop song, every movie. Beat these men at their own game, control them with, your female sexuality. And it's like, that's a very short period of your life that you even have an option to do that. And doing that is wicked for lots of reasons. It's projecting your will. It is magic. It is demonic.
That's what Anton LaVey said was to do, it's a form of witchcraft, right? Where it's like you do whatever you can to gain control of everybody else at their expense and live it up while you can, because we're all going to die. And that's a very atheistic sort of, hedonistic approach to it. But more perceptive people than Anton LaVey understand the power of this kind of stuff over society. I mean, even Plato, we critique Plato all the time, but Plato understood that if you let the passions run wild in a society, it actually leads to the dissolution of the society. And that's precisely what this is, because as you're saying, you couldn't have the cultural, the sexual revolution without this revolution, right?
Yeah. Well, and like you were just saying a minute ago about male sacrifice, you can't hardly scroll through social media now without seeing some public school teacher teaching kids about gender ideology. And isn't it funny that these people want us to chop off our children's reproductive organs? Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And so we go back to the 1840s with Margaret Fuller talking about, Skittles ideology and trans ideology. And now, almost 200 years later, we're actually doing this to children. Like, we're advocating surgically and chemically castrating children. And this has worked. That's one of the things that's unfortunate, is like the birth rate from 1870 just to 1940 went from 5 kids per household down to 2. And now we're well below replacement at like 1.6. So it's pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, these are toxic ideologies that are released as viruses to infect and destroy the population. We know about or we think about viruses, whatever anybody thinks about viruses at a cultural level, like, oh, everybody's going to get sick from this bioweapon. But these are ideological and spiritual bioweapons that do the exact same thing on another level. It's another type of warfare. And if people don't understand that we're under civilizational warfare, they don't understand that it's more than what most people think it is. And I think that a lot of these teens and a lot of these Zoomers now, the girls who are, according to TikTok and news and all this stuff, that they're all getting into witchcraft because they think that it is a form of this kind of empowerment. But if you look at the witch, what's the archetype of the witch? It's the old hag that's alone.
Yeah, she lives out on
in the forest. Yeah, she's over there eating pine cones and
got 500 cats.
She got cat boyfriends and licking pine cones because that's all there is for her to do. That and eat babies, I guess, right? So we just watched a movie, by the way, about it was a great example of what Rachel's talking about in terms of her book, and it's called. I'm not necessarily telling you to watch this movie because it's about witches, but it actually illustrates this point. It's called Hellbender. It's an indie witch movie, and it's about this witch who is passing on her lineage of being the alpha witch to her understudy person. And I won't spoil the plot of the movie, but basically the ultimate alpha witch is the old hag out in the woods who gets devoured by another witch, because that's the only person that could devour a witch. And in the film, she is a representation of the chaotic forces of Calypso and nature run amok, and there's no man. The only man who shows up gets devoured by these two witches. And the irony is that they're completely parasitic. Like the whole ethos of the witch is nothing but parasitic. And so she's a figure, an archetype of death and sterility. It's the opposite of the production of life, you see.
Yeah. And that's why, like, all the Disney movies like Snow White or Tangled or any of the Disney movies that have like a witch who hates the young, beautiful maiden, the pure, young,
Exactly.
beautiful maiden. That's why, is because they, they're trying to hold on to their youth, and they need to do horrible things to try to hold on to their youth, and so they'll try to kill the young maiden and get her youth somehow, things like that. I mean, you see this stuff everywhere. So it's
Well, yeah,
very permeated through the whole culture.
yeah, and they're pushing that to younger groups, I think, as a larger strategy of what we're talking about here. So, um, so this brings us up into the 80s and 90s, and you'll know something that I didn't notice. I want to ask you about, because you mentioned some figures in the 80s that I didn't even think about. Like, I never even thought about Oprah being a figure of feminism, but obviously she is, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and she's also, has this sort of esoteric and new age component to her as
Mhm.
well, which she's pushed on her outlets for a long time. But I was watching some old commercials from the 90s the other day, and I was coming of age, high school in the 90s. And so a lot of these commercials I had seen at the time, but I didn't notice how many 90s commercials were actually filled with feminist stuff. And so if you go watch, for example, just an hour or two of commercials from the 90s, you'll notice this. Especially on like MTV, like MTV's 90s commercials for 1 hour. That could be its own fascinating, like semiotic, archetype deconstruction, because it's wild. It's like every ad is like subtly feminist. Every ad is about that, because they were running these campaigns of rock the vote, and it was
Yes.
like, if you care about women, if you want to rock the vote for women, get out there and vote for Bill Clinton. Bill
Yeah.
Clinton, the
Right.
archetype for the rights of women. I mean, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it is crazy, but I mean, I remember that because I'm around your age, and
Right.
I grew up in mostly the 90s too. Like, I was junior high, high school age in the 90s, and strong woman stuff was everywhere. I mean, I grew up with She-Ra, and then like all the pop stars, all the rock stars. It was like Madonna and Shania Twain, and then later, a little bit later, like late 90s, early 2000s, it became like Beyonce, and every single song, right? Every movie, every commercial, everything was just like, the woman is the competent, rational
Yeah, exactly.
person who has it together, and the man is just a bumbling retard who can't do anything, and he can't be counted on, and he's reckless, and he's silly, and it I didn't realize until I was older how much that stuff impacted me. And this is the problem with it. It's so subtle. It's like, I would sabotage my relationships with men when I was younger, because I would, you know, it was like, anything a man does, this is the point we're at now. Anything a man does other than worship you is abuse, right? It's abusive. I'm not saying that there aren't men out there who are abusive. That's a thing. We all know this. We don't have to like always tell people that there are outliers and there are exceptions. But now it's like, if a man doesn't just straight up worship you, it's abusive. And where do you think those ideas came from? Where do you think that came from? Well, it came from all this stuff, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like, everything you watch, if a man is just even, if he's just like, yeah, I don't think that your craft project is interesting, it's like, he's abusive and he doesn't care about me, and he's just a horrible, horrible misogynist.
Well, I was
Silly.
remembering these 90s ads, and one of the things that popped up was MTV was running this whole promo for GI Jane. Do you remember that?
Yes, I
And
do.
that's all about Demi Moore is playing this like bald, shaved headed private that I guess is supposed to be front lines. I've never watched this stupid movie,
She
but
wants to get through the SEAL
she
program. She
wants to
wants to be
be on
the
the front
first
lines as a
woman to
black
go through the
ops. Yeah,
SEAL
women
program.
black ops, of course, right. And so not only was MTV running the ads, they were running actual special promos about it being about the place of women. Like, it's like, don't you want to go die? For all of us dudes have had the opportunity and the blessing to go and die for Halliburton and McDonald's and Subway, and you ladies have just been missing out. You didn't get the chance to go die for Subway in some other country so that they could have subs and cheeseburgers, but
And Nikes.
and Nikes. But that's actually what I mean. I didn't even realize. I mean, I never watched that stupid movie, but it was like, that whole movie was just about getting women not just in the military, but like onto the front lines and into black ops. That's crazy.
Yep.
In the
Yeah.
90s. And then they
Yeah.
came out with the private Lynch story, which was actually, if you read about it, the BBC had articles at the time the whole story of Private Lynch about the woman who's the hero on the front lines, it was all made up.
Yep.
And
It was totally fabricated.
And directed by Jerry Bruckheimer for Donald
Yes.
Rumsfeld in the Pentagon.
Yes, 100%. And I remember that. So if you guys don't know, I'm starting a channel finally. We're launching it tomorrow. And the first episode, I'm going to have Baze Lit Analyzer and Jerry from Exposing Powerful Lies. And we are going to do a review of Team America World Police because it directly relates to this subject, as well as a piece that I wrote for my Substack about wartime propaganda. And if you look back at that movie 20 years later, it's mind-blowing how much they got right in lampooning all the war stuff. And my favorite part of that movie is the country song, Freedom Isn't Free, partially because, and I like, I like the old country music myself, and I'm a country girl and all that. But you guys, if you put that song on country radio right now, it would be like a #1 hit, and they wouldn't even know it was a parody song, because that's how hard people fell for that propaganda after the big event, right? Where they, all the country songs and everything. It was like,
if you watch Wag the Dog, do you remember that country song where Willie Nelson comes up with a song about the old shoe?
Yeah,
it's really funny. Well, and it's just war propaganda about the old shoe.
Yeah, and in the lyrics to the song is like, maybe now it's your turn to die kicking some ass.
Yeah.
And they were trying to get women in on it too. It was like, well, why should men be the only ones that get to do Green Beret stuff and Black Ops? Don't you want to be in Rainbow Six?
Dude, worst ever is the worst of all of those. I mean, the Katy Perry Army of One song or whatever it's called, that's one of the worst. And then the other one, because that's about women in the military too, that Katy Perry song. Do you remember that?
Yes, all of Katy Perry's stuff is like unabashedly occult feminist stuff.
Well, that's true, but I'm saying that specifically the one about where she joins the military, right? Which is ridiculous. But and then she's like doing the same thing as It's like a G.I. Jane theme thing. But do you remember that Toby Keith song right after 9/11 where it was like, "We'll put a boot in your ass"? Yeah,
it's
that's
the
like
American way.
It's American way.
I have friends that still on the 4th of July, like that's their playlist is all that stuff. And I'm like, it's the exact same thing as the Team America song. Like there's almost no difference whatsoever. And just, it's amazing how effective propaganda is, that even you and I growing up in the 80s and 90s didn't realize we're like swimming in feminist water. It's just all around us. So we don't even notice it until later. You go back with the eyes that you have now and you look at it and you're like, what? That's insane. This is crazy that this stuff was going on this whole time. And that's why it's nuts to go back to the 1800s and see that they're pushing the same stuff. They were pushing these same kind of things, like the whole make sex work real work, that kind of stuff was all being pushed back then. And it all goes hand in hand with other bad things that we probably can't mention on YouTube. But this stuff is not new. It's old. But they've done such a good job with the propaganda over the last 75 years or so that now it's the default setting. And people don't even know that they have this programming, that they think this way. It's just like, if you did a man on the street and asked them what the women's movement was about, they would say, well, it was because women were enslaved and women should have a choice to do what they want with their life. And feminism is not at all about choices for women. It's not just so that I can choose what I want to do with my life. It's not what it's about at all. It's about trying to get me to reject marriage. It's about trying to get me to reject motherhood. All of these icons of feminism are in direct contrast to those of us who are Orthodox or even Catholic and venerate Mary, the Mother of God. It's always a diametric opposition to her. And I don't think it's totally coincidental that in America, where it's a Protestant ethos, and the people who came here and settled this country were some of the craziest and most radical Protestants who couldn't even, like the European Protestants wouldn't even tolerate them. So they came here and they completely rejected veneration of Mary, that this feminism stuff just came in almost right off the bat and it just permeated the culture. It was widely accepted. We had feminist communist communes here in this country in the 1840s where they were doing gender swapping. They had the men taking care of the babies and doing the domestic work, and they had women trying to do farming and wear pants and cut their hair short in the 1840s.
Yeah, that's well, doesn't, by the way, before we move on to the symbols of this stuff, Jim Bob had a good joke in the chat. He said would you want to die for Halliburger, which is weaponized burgers? And then I came up with an addendum joke to that, which is, what do you put on a Halliburger?
I have no idea.
Mustard gases. Because it's Bush, Halliburton, George Bush, mustard gases, right?
Yes. Yes.
So
the
that
Bush
one,
family. The Bush family
Yep.
was also like tied in with a lot of the feminism stuff way back in
Really?
the day. Oh yeah.
I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
It was back when I have it in my notes here. Yeah, it was Alva Vanderbilt Belmont and William Kissam Vanderbilt. He was part of the Jekyll Island Club that did the Federal Reserve Act. And then later, the secret societies that the Bush family, like Prescott Bush, were all in, because they were in more than Skull and Bones. They were in a couple of other, like Sons of the Revolution or something like that. It's in the book. And yeah, that stuff was all tied in with theater and feminism, which theater is another thing that you find all the time tied in with feminism. Like Florence Farr was a theater star around the time of W.B. Yeats and George Bernard Shaw. She was one of their muses. She also slept with both of them, as we keep seeing over and over. And it's always like theater, movies, plays, stuff like that goes along with this feminism stuff too. But yeah, it's all these legacy families, all these elites, all these foundations are the ones that want this for all of the same usual reasons. For it's great for depopulation, it's great for social engineering, it's great for all the reasons that we've already mentioned. But
yeah, and somebody said, why do you always explain your jokes? Because there's always a bunch of slow boys in the audience and slow girls, not to be anti-feminist, so we need to be fair.
He's not a misogynist.
There are slow boys and slow girls of great exceptional ability. They're exceptionally slow girls and exceptionally slow boys in the audience. So I always have to explain the jokes because they go over people's heads. That's why. But anyway,
I always get people on Twitter that are like, "You think you're funny, but you're not. You're not funny at all."
Oh, I get that all the time, and I agree with them. I just say you're right. So we've gone for a good hour here. We got a nice almost 600. This is great on a Wednesday night. Really good book. I've been looking at it today, getting ready for this. I didn't read the whole book yet, but I'm really impressed with it. I think you did great work. And the link is in the show description. We've also had the mods putting the link into the chat. Let's go to, do you mind answering super chats?
No, absolutely. Let's do it.
So guys, if you got questions, Rachel's book goes into a lot of depth. We've kind of hit the highlights. If you got questions for Rachel, do that via the super chat function. People are asking in the chat. We got a new big influx of people due to the Timcast interview. So we got a couple thousand people that are new here. Welcome everybody. The super chats don't work because I'm too awesome. I'm too beige and red pilled. They don't let a celebrity diva like myself have super chat functions. It's just too edgy. So you got to go to Streamlabs, and you do it through Streamlabs. Support the show via the Streamlabs super chat function right there. And let's see, the first question is Dr. Vagisil. I sense a joke there somewhere. There's some kind of joke involved in that name. I don't know.
He's an OG super chatter.
So this is one of your peeps.
He's like in Cotel's chat and some of those. Yeah, he's a good dude. We like Dr. Vagisil. His name is perfect for this, really.
Is it better to sleep on the roof than be in a tin house with a contentious woman? It's better to support clay pots of God's word like Jay and Rachel. I have to go finish writing prescriptions. Good night, y'all.
Thanks, Dr. Vagisil.
Storm the Cat. Have you ever seen the movie Possession with Sam Neill? I don't get it. Possession with Sam. I feel like maybe. Is that the one that has, is that a Roman Polanski movie? Yes, I think I have seen this. No, it's not Roman Polanski. It's that other foreign Andres. I don't know that. Yeah, we have seen that. I don't know what it means. Jamie and I watched it and we were like, what? I don't know if it has feminist themes, but I wouldn't be surprised because a lot of those avant-garde European cinema snob people thought they were being edgy by feminist themes. But I don't know what the movie meant either. Storm the Cat. Why couldn't Helen Keller drive a car? Because she was a woman. Ba-doom. Nice. I don't know who heck Helen Keller is, but I'm guessing that's funny. Well, Emmanuel, I'm just joking. See, I'm joking. Of course, I know who Helen Keller is. She's America's most famous female comedian from Maud, right? Isn't that Helen Keller?
Yeah, I thought she was that deaf, blind, dumb, amputee, autistic person of color who worked miracles, but I could be wrong.
Oh, you're thinking of Amy Semple McPherson. Remember her?
No.
Oh, actually,
Is she a woman comedian too? Because I don't watch them.
well, she might as well be, but
I'm a bitter misogynist.
you know what? Amy Semple McPherson would fit into your book because she was one of the first famous charismatic women preachers.
Oh.
And so like in the 50s and 60s,
she was how I feel about the female preachers.
She was filling up these auditoriums with her, Benny Hinn style stuff back in like the 50s and 60s. And what's weird about her is that she acts just so creepy, and she would preach like that.
Ugh.
Yeah, she had this really weird drawing out the words. Look up for you guys that are.
I will
look up Amy Semple McPherson, but I guarantee you that she also would have connections with the ideas of feminism and all this kind of stuff they're talking about as a evangelical Pentecostal. Amazingly.
Oh, the Dr. Preacher ladies are gonna get it on my channel. They're gonna be a prime target because I have a bone to pick with them and I can't take it. I just can't take it. It's so absurd.
Well, Emmanuel says $5. Thank you. BMX 1966, old school, long time super chatter. Thank you so much. BMX says, awesome. This is great stuff. You're awesome, and thank you for your great stuff. Fan, $5. Keep up the good work, Jay. Have you ever thought of becoming a clergyman? No, absolutely not. I'm not fit to be a clergyman. But thank you for your kind comments and your super chat. J Mel, $30. What were the changes, Rachel, that were in this women's Bible? Did they make Ruth the Messiah or something like that?
Yeah, so they changed the part where Eve was the one that ate the fruit, and they made it something more like both of them were to blame type of thing, because they felt it was really unfair that the woman was blamed, and that a lot of misogyny in Christianity came from this idea. They also took away anything that was like a reference to patriarchs of the Old Testament, anything that smacked of male supremacy, or anything that said that women couldn't do X, Y, or Z. They just basically took anything they found to be patriarchal and changed it and modified it so that it didn't say that anymore. One of the women who worked on the Women's Bible was Matilda Joslyn Gage, who was L. Frank Baum's mother-in-law, the guy who wrote The Wizard of Oz. And she was an occultist. She absolutely hated Christianity, hated it. And she almost got herself in jail a couple times because she would write anti-Christian tracts and books and things like that. And he said that she was like a main inspiration for Glenda the Good Witch for him, and that she had a big impact on him and his writing and his worldview, because he lived with her for most of his marriage like a true soy boy, married her daughter and then lived with mom, while he wrote books or whatever.
So there you go, J Mel. They changed everything, which makes sense because a lot of these people were in the same circles of the Unitarian Universalists. And if you remember, Jefferson, made up his own Bible that removed all the miracles. So
yeah, same thing.
Admin, $5. This is a great live stream. By the way, tell Lord Voldemort to bring back the live chat on his show. I will say something like that, even though I don't know that he ever had live chat. Maybe on band.video they had live chat. I don't know. But so Rachel, you said you're starting a new channel separate from okay. And what will that be? Just your name or what?
It's just Rachel Wilson. Yep, it's brand new. It doesn't have anything on it yet. First stream will be tomorrow. It's just my name, Rachel Wilson. We're actually simultaneously streaming this to that channel right now. So if you just look for Rachel Wilson on YouTube, hopefully it will come up. I'm going to link to it tonight right after I get off of here on my Twitter.
And if you're watching this later, guys, I will have in the show description the links as well that are appropriate. And I want to add that it's the time right now to counteract the magic of the feminist occultists with our own in-house magic. Chalk.com. Do you see that little thing right there? That will up your toxic masculinity points 100%. I was drinking it today, and it was so strong that Jamie bent over, double over, spit it out. She couldn't take it. She fell over. That's how strong Chalk.com is in terms of that Tonkat Ali, guys. I guarantee you. Go get your Tonkat Ali. Go get your Sheila Jet if you want to chill out. Women, chill out. You having hormone problems? Chill out with the Sheila Jet, the ashwagandha, and the Irish Moss over at Chalk.com. 50% off if you use the promo code J50. That's JAY50. That gives you 50% off all those great products. If you want to get recurring subscriptions, use the promo code JAY60 Life. J60 Life, LIFE. Not breath of life, not the breath of life according to Stanley. Don't use the Y in the breath of life. No, it's J60 LIFE. And that gets you 60% off all recurring subscriptions. Guys, we're live in person February 11th in Austin, Texas with BG Cumby, me, Jamie BG Cumby. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be comedy. It's going to be serious, hardcore lectures for hours. You get access to all of that. Get your books signed. Come get books. Come chill with us. Everybody says the live shows are a blast. They're a party. You have to go get the tickets, though. Guys, where's everybody at? Come to the live event. They're a lot of fun. I guarantee you. We had 120 people in Nashville, the live event. We had 100 people.
I went to the Nashville one, guys, and it was super fun.
Thank you, Rachel.
It was a great time.
Wasn't it fun?
You'll meet all the other cool Bays Chad nerds, and it's a great time. Go to it.
You might even meet a beautiful, handsome e-celebrity diva like myself. But you got to go get a ticket, guys, and you get to meet BG Cumby as well. There might also be some interesting other people that I can't name who might show up. Anyway, so definitely do that, guys. Also support our new sponsor, Richard Grove, over at Tragedy and Hope. Subscribe to Richard's channel. Subscribe to him on Rockfin. Follow Grand Theft World, one of the best podcasts out there in terms of geopolitics, history, and meta-analysis. Subscribe to Rachel as well on her new channel. And also, guys, look forward to Jamie Kennedy in the new interview that he's done with Jamie Hanshaw. So Jamie and Jamie tonight did a long podcast. That's why we were late tonight, was that they were using the studio, which is all fake green screen cardboard books. There's no real books in here. It's all fake. I've never read a book in my life. I can't even read. I got the, what do they call it when you can't read? Epilepsy. I'm just kidding. It's not called epilepsy. Illiteracy. That's what it is. Anyway, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on. We had a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a great honor to be on here. And I don't know if you've gotten to the chapter yet, but I do mention you because I go over Marjorie Cameron. And I didn't know about her until you mentioned her and the Jack Parsons Crowley stuff. And she's like, oh my gosh, she's like a perfect like symbol for all of this stuff. She was probably, she was probably like the quintessential occult feminist, if there ever was one.
The Scarlet Women of Crowley's little Scarlet Women were sort of the archetype par excellence of what Rachel's talking about. And Marjorie was supposed to be one of these. She was in Crowley's mind, going to be one of the central figures of the apocalypse, so it would sort of bring the end times. And so in the Crowleyan ethos, feminism is a manifestation of the Scarlet Woman, who is Babylon, who brings the end of the world.
Yes.
So anyway, but I didn't actually get to that yet. So I'm glad to know that I made it into the.
Yes, you did.
Footnotes. Oh, that's cool. Thank you so much. Oh, Rachel, thank you for coming on. And I'm sure that in the future we can do some more interviews. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you so much. Would love to do that. And thanks everybody for watching.
Vagisil's back. He doesn't want us to leave. He gives another $1 and he says, feminism teaches girls to take zinc sauce to get wrist floss to show their girlfriends she's a girl boss while she's controlled and evil and lost. So I think I was supposed to rap that.
Yeah,
but
that's pretty good.
I didn't realize it until like the last third, but all right. Thank you, Dr. Vagisil.